Welcome. Imagine being stranded on a raft in the middle of the ocean, with no food, no water, and no hope of rescue. This was the fate of the survivors of the shipwreck that inspired one of the most powerful paintings of the 19th century. The Raft of the Medusa by Théodore Géricault is a haunting masterpiece that captures the horror, despair, and resilience of the human spirit in the face of tragedy. Today we will dive into the story behind the painting and the impact it had on the art world and beyond. So, in June 1819 the French warship Medusa departed from Rochefort, in France, bound for the Senegalese port of St. Louis. But due to poor navigation, it drifted 160 kilometers off course, and on the 2nd of July, it ran aground on a sandbank off the West African coast. Efforts to free the ship failed, so the frightened passengers started an attempt to travel the 100 kilometers to the African coast in the frigate's lifeboats. The Medusa was carrying 400 people, but there was space for only about 250 in the boats. The remainder were piled onto a hastily built raft, that partially submerged once it was loaded. The crew of the raft had only a bag of biscuits, 2 casks of water and 6 casks of wine. The weakest were killed or thrown overboard, some died of starvation and some others ate their dead companions in order to survive. The raft was rescued after 13 days, and by this time only 15 men were still alive. The incident became a huge embarrassment for the French monarchy, and it generated widespread public interest. The artist Théodore Géricault was so shocked by the news of the shipwreck, that he decided to use this tragedy to create a painting that could launch his career. He undertook extensive research and produced many preparatory sketches. He interviewed 2 of the survivors and even constructed a detailed scale model of the raft. He visited hospitals and morgues where he could view, firsthand, the color and texture of the flesh of the dying and dead. The Raft of the Medusa portrays the moment when, after 13 days on the raft, the remaining 15 survivors view the ship that will rescue them approaching from a distance. The makeshift raft is shown as barely seaworthy as it rides the deep waves, while the men are rendered as broken and in utter despair. One old man holds the corpse of his son at his knees, another tears his hair out in frustration and defeat. A number of bodies litter the foreground, waiting to be swept away by the surrounding waves. The men in the middle have just viewed the rescue ship. A couple of them frantically wave their handkerchief to draw the ship's attention. Géricault's palette is composed of pallid flesh tones, and the murky colors of the survivors' clothes, the sea and the clouds. Overall the painting is dark and relies largely on the use of brown pigments, a shade that Géricault believed was effective in suggesting tragedy and pain. The work's lighting has been described as Caravagesque, after Caravaggio, who was closely associated with tenebrism, the use of violent contrast between light and dark. Even Géricault's treatment of the sea is muted, being rendered in dark greens rather than the deep blues generally used to depict the ocean. There had never been a painting like Raft of the Medusa. It was on the grand scale of French history painting, but instead of ideal forms and a moralizing story from history, Géricault offered the audience a thoroughly modern, romantic depiction of death and suffering based on a contemporary event that was in the news. The figures in the painting also reference classical and Renaissance art, such as the Belvedere torso and Ugolino and his children. Despite these more traditional elements, Géricault challenged everything about the conservative approach to art. Instead of celebrating heroism, he presented a gruesome scene of death and despair. The shipwreck had scandalous political implications in France, and so Géricault's picture of the raft and its survivors was greeted with hostility by the government. Géricault showed the work at the 1819 Salon, an annual exhibition of contemporary French art at the Louvre. It was awarded a gold medal, but many critics decried the grisly subject and repellent realism. The Raft of the Medusa was a groundbreaking work of art that revolutionized the way people thought about historical paintings. Géricault's focus on contemporary events, and his departure from the traditional moralizing stories of history painting, paved the way for a new era of art that was more personal, emotional, and socially relevant. It inspired a generation of artists who sought to challenge the conservative approach to art and create works that reflected the realities of the world they lived in. The Raft of the Medusa remains a powerful reminder of the enduring impact that art can have on our understanding of history and our place in the world. So, what do you think about this masterpiece? Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel.